There's been a surprising knock on the BRICS door. France.
Could France be the first European country to be a part of BRICS?
So I think it's fair as a European to be very pushy for more autonomy. It's useful for the US from a defense point of view because this is burden sharing.
That's right, France, a developed country from the Western world, a member of the most exclusive club in the world, G7, has asked for an invitation to the next BRICS summit later on this summer. In this video, let's talk about how real this idea of France joining BRICS could be, what this would mean for their relationship with the current global leaders, and most importantly, how a France move to BRICS would impact the United States and the dollar. Okay, let's get right into it. According to multiple sources, French President Emmanuel Macron has requested an invitation to this year's BRICS summit in South Africa. Now, this comes as a surprise to many, as France is an integral part of the Western world ideology, which is seen as the complete opposite to that of the BRICS countries. BRICS unites the largest emerging and developing countries from around the world and are led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the BRICS nations are setting themselves up to create an economic and political alternative to the Western world, specifically the G7. But if you look closer, France's involvement with BRICS might not be as big of a shock as you would think. BRICS has recently surpassed the G7 nations when it comes to GDP, with BRICS owning 31.7% of global GDP and the G7 countries owning 30.7%. And with at least 20 additional countries having expressed interest in joining BRICS, France would be the first European country to do so, especially during the extreme Ukraine-Russia conflict. But France's relationship isn't that amazing with the 5 BRICS founding members. Just recently at the G7 summit, France co-signed the idea of being more united behind Ukraine, creating even more sanctions for Russia, and being more strategic on gaining specific economic advantages back from China. So why would France and Macron choose now to potentially align themselves with BRICS? President Macron has built an image on being bold and decisive with his strategic moves, for better or for worse. Although he may not agree with the core ideology of BRICS and the emerging bloc, it seems like he has the future vision to understand that the world is evolving. Similar to the messaging that comes from the BRICS countries, Macron has come out and said that Europe must resist pressure to become America's followers and become less dependent on its use of the US dollar. This coming at a time when BRICS is on the verge of announcing their own currency to help fortify a secondary global economy and eventually challenge the strength of the dollar. Being a part of G7 is great and all, but Macron's main priority has to be to ensure economic growth and stability in his own country first, which hasn't been doing so great. The Eurozone is officially in a recession after having negative GDP growth for 2 consecutive quarters. Their economic growth is contracting faster than any projections from the IMF or World Bank, which means France themselves aren't looking too good either. Their inflation is the highest it's been in the last 40 years, and they've been dealing with an energy crisis like the rest of the Eurozone. The main reason for the huge energy crisis seems pretty obvious, and I think the United States is partially to blame. Countries in the G7 and the European Union followed the lead of the United States to cut off the energy supply from Russia to show their support for Ukraine and attempt to cripple the Russian economy, impacting the length of time they would have to be able to afford a war with Ukraine. Those strategies, quite frankly, didn't work out too well, and now France sees an opportunity to become more autonomous, relying less on being in control by other countries like the United States, and forging their own path to become a world powerhouse. Even though Macron recently called China the greatest challenge to global security and prosperity in our time, he has also urged Europe to develop a more strategic autonomy with the United States, China, and other markets around the world, which caused an uproar. But maybe he's right. In a recent interview, he emphasized his theory of strategic autonomy for Europe, that in his beliefs and his view would allow Europe to become the world's 3rd superpower. In today's world where we separate all political ideologies and economic opportunities in separate buckets, Macron must see the controversial yet rapidly expanding BRICS bloc as a tool to gain that autonomy and gain independence from the US dollar, which has become a means to an end. Right now, it's tough to imagine Europe as the 3rd superpower, not with the largest economy in Europe, Germany, entering a recession and openly saying we need that cheap gas again in order to revive our manufacturing. Manufacturing is the core of the German economy, and since Germany accounts for 30% of the EU's GDP, Europe goes as Germany goes for now. So as long as Europe keeps struggling with energy costs, it's safe to say that these problems are going to keep persisting, and it makes it unlikely that Europe will become the third superpower anytime soon. But does that mean Europe and other countries around the world should just be content with the position they're in and keep playing second fiddle to the United States and the dollar? In an article from the Global Times, they said, "There is a need for someone to transcend ideological and geopolitical barriers and break free from mental and conceptual constraints. This could potentially lead to unexpected positive effects." What if that country is France? If France can truly act as the intermediary to the world's invisible barriers and dysfunctions, it would undoubtedly make its international status stand out. But not everyone is excited about France's initiatives, specifically Russia, who has had some of its leaders reply to the France request by saying, "Considering this, the inappropriateness of the appearance of representatives of the collective West there is simply obvious." And do they want to once again make some contact to show Paris's activity, or is it a Trojan horse of some sort? If you like these videos about the global impact of the US dollar and want to see more of them, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If France joins BRICS, what is the impact on the US economy and the dollar? President Macron has already expressed interest in reducing the dependence of the dollar. When talking about the United States and China, he said, "If the tensions between the two superpowers heat up, we won't have the time nor the resources to finance our strategic autonomy, and we will become vassals." To put his money where his mouth is, he made an agreement with China to purchase liquefied natural gas in the Chinese yuan. It's not too surprising that France is now calling on the European Union to end its reliance of the US dollar in order to avoid certain risks. Macron added that France and Europe should not get caught up in crises that are not their own. Reading the tea leaves here, he seems to be referring to the debt crisis here in the United States that no one really seems to be talking about anymore, as if it doesn't exist. When it comes to de-dollarization, the BRICS countries have been chipping away at this for decades. It's caused panic here in the United States and with lawmakers in Washington. But what if all that had just been child's play, and France is actually the first significant domino to fall in the collapse of the dollar? It feels like the dollar would have a faster decline if more developed countries hopped aboard the de-dollarization train. At the end of 2022, the US dollar was used in 49.6% of all EU imports and 31.8% of all EU exports. And while the euro was used significantly in these transactions as well, it shows the continued dominance of the US dollar. Let's imagine that the Eurozone made it a priority to reduce the reliance on the dollar, and in the next 5 years, those EU transactions involving the dollar got reduced by 5% each. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars worth of transactions that the dollar is not going to be involved in anymore. If France gets invited to the BRICS summit, maybe they don't join, but instead create professional relationships with the BRICS countries. I could see the developed countries in Europe and all around the world keeping a close eye on how it impacts the French economy. The majority of the world, specifically the European Union, rely heavily on the United States and China for trade, but they also don't want to be caught with their pants down if relations between these two countries hit rock bottom. While France likely won't be the first country to join BRICS, there are a ton of candidates who could. But who is the most likely country to join BRICS, and most importantly, how would that impact the US dollar? I go over all that in this video here.